Good evening, everyone. Good evening and welcome to Winter 2022 IROS Q&A with David Liben. I'll turn it over to David to give a welcome to you this evening.
Hi, everybody. Welcome and congratulations on finishing this course in the tail end of what has to be one of the worst years in the history of our profession, with all of the problems that you're more well aware of than I am. So I'm really impressed that given all of this, people signed up for this course. And I hope you get a lot out of it, and I hope this Q&A is also helpful.
Thank you, David. If it's possible, can you please put your name, school and district and role in the chat? We'll spend the next minute or so just doing that, and then we'll go over the agenda for the evening and vote on some questions.
We have somebody from Vermont. Meredith and I live in Vermont. We live in Heartland.
That's me. Hi.
Hi.
It's a nice day today.
Yeah, well, it's gotten a little cloudy in the last half hour or so, but it was a beautiful day most of the day.
Well, I'm in Burlington. It's gorgeous.
Yeah, I think you're getting the sun today and the rain tomorrow, and it's reversed here. We're getting the rain. Well, actually, we're okay for another 24 hours, according to the eye on the sky.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing in the chat. So we had our welcome, and what we're actually going to do is, when you registered for this event, there was the opportunity to go ahead and submit questions in advance. What we're going to do is we're actually going to vote on the questions that were submitted in advance. And David will spend the bulk of our time this afternoon, evening, or early afternoon, depending on where you are, to answer those questions. So I'm going to stop my share really quickly because we are going to use Poll Everywhere to vote. So I'm going to put this in the chat right now. Please let me know if you have any difficulty. Everyone will have about 8 votes. So please choose your top 8 questions that you'd like to have answered this evening, and we will select the top 6 to get started with. So we're going to have the next 5 minutes. Please let me know if it's not working. You can do a thumbs up. I think we should just use the thumbs up feature. So just do a thumbs up if you want to vote on that one. And we will choose, oh, sure, I will go ahead and enable the live transcript. Okay, it should be on right now. So yes, we'll use the next 5 minutes to vote on questions, and we'll come back and we'll get started. Hi, Barb and Shannon. I just want to share in the chat that we are currently voting on the questions that will be answered during the Q&A right now. You can use the link I just shared in the chat to go ahead and vote. Please select up to 8 questions that you'd like answered tonight. We will go ahead and start with the top 6. So we have about 3 more minutes remaining to do that. And I think we're having a couple people trickle in. So we are voting on questions right now. The link is in the chat. Please select up to 8. And depending on which the top 6 are, that is what we will be focusing on to start the Q&A tonight. So please use the link in the chat.
Spelling bee.
Okay, about 1 more minute. Okay, so I will go ahead and get started on the first question that received the most votes. I will put it in the chat. So this is the question. You spoke a lot of fluency. The best way to help accelerate older students in reading. Is there a place for phonics instruction in upper elementary, middle school levels? If so, what does it look like? Can you recommend any programs to use? That is the first question.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. First and foremost, as we said in the course, and if any of you have read our book, Know Better, Do Better, as much as possible, you don't want to separate children away from tier 1 instruction. As often as possible, you want them to connect to tier 1 instruction. How do you do that with phonics? It's easier with fluency. What we suggest is 2 things. That as part of the fluency work, as we discussed in the course, for those students, you embed, especially for those students who need it, phonics patterns. So if you're aware, for older students, the most troublesome is always multisyllabic words. So you could get a lot of mileage just by doing multisyllabic words. And Linda Ryan, one of the coordinators on the course, embedded a nice little tool to do that. So you take the multisyllabic word, and using Linda's tool or using another phonetic method, you read it out loud, you blend the sounds together, and then the students read the word. So you read it out loud, you blend the sounds together in the syllables, they blend the sounds together, then you address the spelling. All of this is in chapter 7 of our book, and also I think in chapter 6. In other words, you take the tier 1 text and use it to embed phonics instruction, word level instruction. The problem, and you do it with tier 1 text so that students feel it's a text worth reading and that they've read it, they understand it. Now they're going to learn more about words. The problem is that students need more repetition, and some students need a lot more repetition. So just doing it coming out of the text that you've all read together is not enough. It connects learning to tier 1 instruction, but it's not enough. So how do you get the additional practice that students need? So you've taught, let's say, the EIGH pattern makes an A sound, as in way and neighborhood, etc. But you know that some kids are going to need more practice with that. How can you do that? There's a couple of ways. One is you can get materials that give students independent practice. The simplest and direct way is worksheets. And we now have research, as you may have heard me say, that if you use worksheets, you won't go to hell. And worksheets are a direct way, because they give you, the kids has a list of words with EIGH, and then they have to connect with an arrow to a house next to another house to show that it has to do with neighbor. And if they connect to a horse, you know something is wrong. But if the kid knows what a house is and they know what neighbor is and they've connected it, it's like instant feedback that they got that right. You need to have an opportunity for independent practice that gives students feedback on their own. Worksheets are great. Some games will work. It doesn't have to be a certified teacher to supervise that kind of repetitive practice that some students need a lot of. Some students need very little, and then there's other students in between. So you need that kind of opportunity for students to practice. The program that I recommend is the best for this for older students is Really Great Reading. Really Great Reading has a few components to it, but one of them is designed more specifically for older students. Now it moves fast. It definitely moves fast, and it requires a teacher to do the whole program with students, but you can slow down that movement. You don't have to go as fast as the program moves you, unless you see that that's working for your kids. And that would be one. The other way that you can get these practice materials that you need is on Core Knowledge Language Arts Foundational Skills Program, which is on the Engage New York website. You just go to Engage New York, Core Knowledge, Foundational Skills. It is also on the Tennessee Department of Education website. And it's also on the Core Knowledge websites, and it's free. What they have is something called the Assessment and Remediation Guide. It is hundreds and hundreds of pages connected to any skill that you have been teaching your students, and they need more practice. So again, with our example of EIGH, you go through a table of contents, you see where the EIGH is, and you'll get 5 or 6 pages of practice for EIGH. So as much as possible, embed everything in tier 1, but know that some kids are going to need more practice. Now, there's a problem here. There's a big, serious problem here. You want to pull out those kids who need more practice and more repetition, but then you're separating the weakest kids. How do you do that? You do that by having a time of the day where everybody is working on something. So other kids might be working on vocabulary. Other kids might be working on comprehension. Other kids might be working on fluency. But a stranger, or we don't want strangers walking into the room, but another teacher walks into the room, the principal walks into the room. They don't know who's reading 4 years below grade level and who's reading 2 years above grade level. Everybody is doing something they need and getting the practice and the repetition that they need. So that's the answer. We're developing a program at Student Achievement Partners called the Humanities Accelerator Project. Did I get the name wrong, Rachel? I've said it so many times. It's like
Humanities Accelerator course, but there you go. It is a project.
It is. It's a project for sure. The Humanities Accelerator course. And do they have access to my email, Rachel?
I can share it afterward.
Yeah, you share it afterwards. And I love specific questions by email. I find it fun to stop what I'm doing and answer people's questions. So it's called the Humanities Accelerator course. I can send you something about it. You can learn a little bit about it. And at some point, that'll be something that we've developed to the point where we can bring it to other places. We're not there yet. but that incorporates everything that I said about my answer. How do you get the time? How do you personalize it? And how do you do it so you're not basically insulting kids by only taking the weakest readers out, especially. So that was a very good question.
Thanks, David. There's a question in the chat. The name of the materials from Tennessee. I'm not sure if you're talking about the core language arts is the.
The materials from Tennessee are called.
It had assessment in it, and I didn't write it down fast enough.
What, Teresa?
It had the word assessment in it, and I didn't write it down fast enough. And I'm sorry, I'm getting
I
a
think it's
shower.
called.
It's best for all sounds first.
Yeah. Best for all sounds first. Best for all sounds first on the Department of Tennessee's education website or on our website, Reading Done Right, either one. Meredith thinks it comes out better on ours.
Okay.
And again, if you have trouble finding any of those things,
There are assessments.
and there are assessments embedded in them, and if you have trouble finding anything, you're welcome to email me.
Thank you very much. I'm going to, for people that have joined, we spent the first few minutes voting on questions that would be answered tonight. And if you're wondering who you hear in the background is part of the dynamic duo, it's David and Meredith Liben. So just bouncing off of one another, a great partnership there. So this is the next question in the chat. There was a two-way tie with the next question. So after such a tough year, what could we do to finish strong as a school within our students' literacy growth? What's a good bang for the buck area to focus on from here to the end of the year?
All right, that's quite a question. That's a great question. It would vary, of course, based on it would vary to a great extent based on grade level that you're dealing with. One thing I would say, certainly in K to 5, is to do a lot of read aloud. Everybody loves read aloud, and read aloud grows vocabulary, and read aloud grows knowledge of the world, and read aloud is fun. So I would think about, again, especially in elementary school, taking a large chunk of the day and reading aloud great texts and alternate. In some cases, read aloud texts that are fiction, that are great stories that you love. It always helps to read aloud something you love. Great stories that you love and great stories that students love, and whole books. And stop and ask questions and make it interactive, but focus on enjoyment as much as possible. Don't worry about standards. Don't worry about strategies. Don't worry about the reading tests. Our kids have had enough pressure this year. Read aloud for a great deal of fun. Just doing that will grow everybody's vocabulary, grow everybody's knowledge of the world. That being said, when you do nonfiction, don't read just one text on nonfiction. We talked a little bit about this in the course. If you're going to read a text about dinosaurs, read 4 or 5. If you're going to read a text about weather, read 3 or 4 or 4 or 5. That series of texts on a topic grows tier 2 vocabulary, as we talked about in the course. And it's also interesting. So that's one thing I would certainly do. Second, no matter what, don't cut time on recess. Spend more time on recess, not less. Second thing, have a time in the day where everybody is just hanging out, enjoying each other's company, because that was so rare in the last couple of years. And if possible, invite other people from the school. Post that our class is now going to spend 30 minutes every day at this time, or 20 minutes every day at this time. Invite parents to bring in a snack would be a great way to do it. We're going to spend 20 minutes this time of the day. We're going to have snacks brought in by parents. If any other teachers or administrators or anybody else wants to come in and hang out with our kids and just talk and enjoy each other's company, I would do that. I think any of that would work. for grades K to 8. Things are different in high school. You don't have as much control over the curriculum, especially if you're an intervention teacher. So it's much harder to say what to do. But I would say take pressure off of kids as much as you can, and advocate for pressure being taken off of kids as much as you can. I mean, the National Public Radio just had a thing saying that like half of educators in the country, I think, said that there's been threats, there's been violence. The number of teachers who report that they're not coming back next year is more than at any time in any of our histories, even mine, and I'm really old, as you know. So anything you can do to take pressure off of the kids and off of the teachers and off of yourself is really important. And the only other thing I would add to the content is language games. There is research at the K to 5 level, certainly, that games with language, play Wordle with the whole class. Any kind of language game helps with phonics, helps with spelling, and can be made fun. A really good book, I don't know if we mentioned it in the course, is called Word Nerds. Word Nerds. It's a whole book of fun activities for vocabulary. For example, one of my favorites is called Vocabulary Limbo. You know what the limbo is, where you have to bend underneath some stick? And kids have to do the limbo while they're trying to remember the meaning of a word that they studied. There's like dozens and dozens of games like that in vocabularians. In Word Nerds. Word Nerds is for K to 5. Vocabularians is for 6 to 8, middle school, and high school. I guess you can do it in high school, but it's designed more for 6 to 8. So fun stuff as much as possible. Take pressure off, and you'll end up learning a lot as well. That was a great question.
There's a follow-up question to that question, David. You can just go ahead and ask it, Daniel.
Is that okay? So David, you were talking about how when you're doing the nonfiction texts, it's good to read like several texts versus just one so that they can get the secondary vocabulary. I'm supporting a bunch of high school teachers. I'm thinking about someone who doesn't have tons of like reading content knowledge, like a high school biology teacher. Would it be more beneficial for them to be pushed to have several different texts on one topic, or to do more of those like fluency routines? Which one do you think is going to get the bigger bang for the buck, the vocabulary work or the fluency work?
So you're talking, Danielle, about students in high school in a biology class, is that right?
Yeah.
Well, the fluency work we know will develop their fluency. And when you say a series of texts, do you mean a series of texts that the teacher reads aloud to them or with them following along, or a series of texts that they read?
It could go either way. I don't really I didn't have a...
And are these kids in a tracked class, or is it heterogeneous? Or
most of the people,
intervention?
I would say largely intervention, but it would be a whole group is in that place. I work with alternative high schools, so
okay,
students are like,
definitely do the fluency work if you can. And I would also supplement it with a text set. So let's say they're on the unit on plants, and there's fluency work on photosynthesis, on organs of the plant and so forth. But then find other texts written at a lower level. So let's say 3 or 4 texts that also have to do with plants and food, or plants and the environment, but that are written at a lower level. And there's 3 or 4 of them. And the kids can either read them on their own or read them with some assistance, but not a lot, or even read them on a computer with text to speech. So see if you can combine both the fluency work with the more complex text in their biology class, and the text set with lower level text, but text that will still grow knowledge. The text doesn't have to be written at a high school level for them to grow knowledge. I probably learned more science than I had in my life when my first class, my first teaching, 5th grade in rural Wisconsin. And they had a science textbook. And I realized on the chapter on energy, I didn't know a whole lot about energy. I mean, I had no idea. It's a magnet, you spin the magnet and that moves electrons. I learned a lot by reading that 5th grade textbook. So I think the answer is a both and. Do the fluency work, but if you can put together those kind of text sets with lower level text, that will also help. Good question, Daniel.
Thank you for that follow-up question to the question, Daniel. And we're going to move on to the third question. If you joined while David was speaking in the beginning of our time together, we voted on some questions. We're going to get through 6 questions, and we are on the third one right now. I am putting it in the chat. Okay. I have 5th graders who can read close to grade level, but struggle with spelling below within word pattern level. What is your recommendation for their instruction?
That's a good question. It's interesting to have a lot of kids struggling with spelling if they're decoding efficiently. I would be sure that these students are fluent, that they're pretty fluent, that they're fluent with 5th grade text, not 3rd or 4th grade text. So I'd be sure that they are fluent with 5th grade text, which we talked about how to do that in the course. You get some 5th grade text and you have them read it out loud and get words correct per minute. If you're sure that they're fluent and you don't need to do more fluency work or you don't need to do phonics, you could use Words Their Way. Words Their Way works very well for spelling. And that would, Words Their Way and then dictation. So take see if you can, you don't have to assess the kids. I would use Words Their Way and combine it with dictation. So if your kids are using a certain number of words of a certain pattern, so let's say they're doing some multisyllabic words, and they're doing exercises with those words in Words Their Way. Each week, I would give an assessment where you dictate 10 of those words that they've been working on for a week or 2 weeks. And you want to see if they spell it correctly and give them roughly 30 seconds to spell it correctly, roughly. If they can spell the word correct, that will improve their spelling and will also cement that they're working at a 5th grade level. So dictation will help. You can use dictation with words from your content text, from your literacy text, or you can just engage everybody in Words Their Way, and that will improve their spelling. Good question.
Can I just ask a clarifying question to that?
Absolutely.
That was my question. So with those words, would I start them at the within word pattern, like the silent E? You know, is that the kind of words I would start them with from their 5th grade content reading that they're doing? Does that make sense?
Again, if they're, is it Maya?
Yeah, it's Maya.
Maya. You want to be sure that these kids are reading 5th grade text fluently. If they're reading 5th grade text fluently, they should be okay at the within word stage. But it's okay to back up a little and do some spelling at the within word stage and then move up from there. That would be okay. I just want you to make sure they're fluent at a 5th grade level.
So I'm not their reading teacher, I'm their science teacher. So I'm not the one.
You could still assess them if you wanted.
Yeah.
I mean, someone might come in and arrest you, but maybe not. What I would do is start at the within word level. That's probably your gut anyway. And then if you see them, they're moving through it very fast, move to the next level.
Great, thank you so
Good
much.
question, and congratulations to you for for thinking that people are going to learn very little science if they can't read.
There's one more follow-up question before we move up to the next question. David, it's wondering why, or if you would start with the patterns that the children are struggling with for the spelling.
Well, you would, but if you have groups, that works okay. But if you're dealing whole class, you got to make a decision where to start. If you're in groups and if you've assessed them and you've got groups and you know based on Gansky's work or based on other assessments where kids are struggling, then you start with where they're struggling. But if you're dealing whole class, you're probably better, and I think Maya is dealing whole class, right? You're better off going down one stage and say, okay, I think some of my kids are within word, or some of my kids are with this stage above within word, which I'm now forgetting the name of. And then you go back down below that and start there and then move up. So it's really a difference between what stage students, whether you're doing a group in an intervention or you're doing a group in an elementary school class or you're doing whole class, makes a huge difference. It's similar with fluency. The research with whole class is if you're doing fluency with everybody, you should be doing fluency with grade level text. If you're doing small groups, you can start a little lower than grade level and move up faster, and that's okay. You might have some kids reading at a second grade level, and you could do third grade fluency work with them and then move them up more quickly. So a lot depends on, are you grouping or is it whole class, which has a lot to do with the entire foundational skills world. Good question, Catherine. And was that helpful? You can give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Or a
yeah, it was helpful. I hadn't learned that she was a whole class science teacher when I asked the question, but yep, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for that follow-up question, Catherine. We're moving on to question 4. I put it in the chat. How important is it to front load knowledge and vocabulary before reading a complex text?
Okay, this is a great question that's come up a lot in my own thinking, in my own work, because I was a teacher for about 20 years, and in reading. You can give some words before. I would not give some knowledge before, because again, if you're dealing, and complex text should be done whole class, you don't know what kids know. Some kids might have that knowledge and some kids might not, and there's no way of knowing. You're not going to assess their knowledge before every topic. So I wouldn't give any knowledge in advance. If there's some highly specialized vocabulary or some rare vocabulary that's really important to the text, then give it beforehand. Don't give a whole bunch. They're not going to be able to remember like 10 words and then go on and read the text. That's not going to work. If there's a few really important words that are rare that you know a lot of your kids don't know the meaning of, that's okay to do that before you read the text. Another way to approach it, and this is what I did as a teacher. If I know tomorrow we're reading this text, I would give some words. And if I had a dictionary they could use, which is very rare, or we had another source of information, or really, since I was a workaholic, I would give them the words a couple of days before, write out the meanings, and have them and assign it for homework, like 2 or 3 days before they read the text. That was helpful. But to give them like 5 or 10 words or 6 or 7 words, whatever, right before they read the text, that's going to cause more confusion than not. So that's the answer with vocabulary. Then after you've done the first read, because a complex text should always have a first read with no interruptions, to see if kids are getting a sense of the gist of the text or of what's going on here before you dig deeper. But on a second read is a great time using the words and using questions from the text, questions about the text-specific questions, to dig into some of the vocabulary, which some of the kids might know or some of the kids might not know. and then ask some question, do some work with that vocabulary in the context of the text after the second read. And then I like for the third read, after you've had the first read to get the gist, the second read to do the vocabulary and to talk about some of the references to knowledge. And then in the third read to dig even deeper. There's descriptions of this on Achieve the Core. If you go to Achieve the Core, achievethecore.org, and do a search for close reading, what I described is described there in sections on close reading. We talked a little bit about it in the class, but it's really delved into pretty extensively on Achieve the Core. How do you do close reading? What kind of questions do you make? How do you deal with vocabulary? That's the best way to deal with that. And I want to reinforce the idea of don't give them the knowledge in advance. Don't give them pre-reading about, let me tell you what you need to know to answer this text. Because kids can figure out on their own lots of times. Not all the time, but lots of times. For example, I'll give you an example from science. 10th grade, kids were reading a text on diatomic molecules. I assure you, I did not know what diatomic molecules were before doing this with a science teacher in the 10th grade, but I did know the root atomic and the suffix di. So I've kind of figured out that those were diatomic algae, 2-molecule algae. And the whole, in that text, they kept talking about algae as a source of biofuels. And whenever they wanted to talk about how efficient it was, they compared it to soybeans. They compared it, they said, well, it's better than soybean because of this. It's better than soybean because of that, or soybean does this. Nowhere in that text did they mention that biofuels in the United States were exclusively made from soybeans. But when we asked the kids a question, why did they say so? Why did they compare everything to soybeans? Every single kid got it. This must be the way it's done now. That's why they kept comparing it to soybeans. Or as one kid said, this must be numero uno in the biofuel world, Mr. Liben. So lots of times kids can gain the knowledge from reading the text, and you don't want to give it to them in advance. With vocabulary, it's a little different because sometimes you get some words that a few words, as I said, that nobody's going to know, and it's going to screw them up. They're not going to understand what's happening, and it's okay to give them that in advance with some kind of lesson. These are good questions.
Thanks, David. I'm going to be moving on to our 5th question right now. I'm putting it in the chat. Oh, wait, hold on 1 second. Sorry.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question on that? So I'm thinking about my classroom practice, which we have a text that is the autobiography of Wilma Mankiller. And I find that my students have very little understanding of historical interactions between the US government and Native American tribes. And so I have preloaded knowledge about the historical acts that might inform them about her biography. Is that not worth doing?
What grade are we talking about, Teresa?
6th grade.
And is this in an English class or what?
Yeah, language
6th
arts, reading and writing.
So a middle school 6th grade language arts class.
Mm-hmm.
You could give them a text set like we talked about in the course on Native Americans before they read. This is a full-length work, Wilma Mankiller, right? You could give them.
No, it's an excerpt, but yeah.
You could give them a text set of simpler texts.
Mm-hmm.
Read 3 or 4 simpler texts about Native Americans, and there are those, written, as you probably know, at as low as a 2nd grade level, and that's okay. So you could do that, and then as we talked about in the course, you ask questions, you do activities on the text set, and then you get to the more complex text, and they have the background knowledge that helps. So that's one way to address that. If you can't do it that way, for whatever reason, I would do it do the first read of Wilma Mankiller as we described. Don't give them any of the background knowledge. And ask some questions to pull out the background knowledge based on the questions. And that just like I talked about with the biofuels text. Does that help?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay, good question.
Thanks for the follow-up question. The next question, I put it in the chat. I've been reading lots of articles and discussions on PA and have seen several arguments against advanced PA activities, that they are as yet unsupported by research. I'm very interested in your take.
This is a really important question. Is the person who asked it here?
I am.
Lynn?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, Lynn. What grades are you working with, and what grades are you thinking about in terms of this question, which is a great question?
So I'm the ELA coordinator for my very small rural district. And this year I've largely worked with supporting teachers and instructional specialists in K through 5. Next year we'll be probably supporting K through 12. So big grade levels to address there. And really it's come up frequently because we've been kind of studying the science of reading, trying to gain more information, get more involved in understanding what our practices should look like. And in our district, we have lots of kiddos who are 4th, 5th grade and up who are missing some key foundational pieces. But we kind of coming back to one of the earlier questions, we want to make sure that we're getting the best bang for our buck and not spending time doing things that are not going to be moving the needle for us.
Right. Well put. In K to 5, are they using a core ELA program?
So we do have a core ELA program. We're actually moving to a new one, a new adoption for next year. We adopted a HMH into reading for next year and into literature. So we're doing it'll be a consistent K-12 program, same publisher.
Okay, HMH is okay, is okay for foundational skills. It's not so okay for knowledge, but it is okay for foundational skills. And they do have phonemic awareness, but if I remember correctly, let me just consult my colleague who I married. HMH, did they have advanced APA? Did they have advanced phonemic awareness? None at all.
In my digging into it, it looks like it's primarily in K and 1, and then it falls out, like it doesn't even have
Right.
it in 2nd grade.
Yeah, that's a problem because the kids who need it, whether they're in 2nd, 3rd, or 4th grade. So here's the story with the research. It's long, there's basic phonemic awareness, how many sounds in a word, and you know what that is, and combine and add to make sound, etc. Nobody disputes the importance of that. And if the kids are in the 4th grade and they can't do that, they need that. But then there's this more advanced. And some people have said, well, there's no research. Now what does that mean that there's no research? Here's what that means. Nobody took a group of kids and taught them with advanced phonemic awareness and took another group of kids that were similar, same kinds of kids, and taught them only with basic phonemic awareness. And then they assessed their word recognition, not their comprehension, but their word recognition, because comprehension is further down the road. And then they showed that with everything being equal, the kids who got the advanced phonemic awareness did better with word recognition in the same amount of time, same length of time, same hours instruction, et cetera, than the kids who did not get the advanced phonemic awareness. And that study has not been done. And so what's the evidence for advanced phonemic awareness? The studies that have been done were not like the studies I described. The studies that have been done worked with some of the weakest readers. One by Joseph Torgerson at the University of Florida, who's been doing, he's older than me, which is like older than dirt. And he's been doing this for a long time. And one was by Shaywitz, who's a psychiatrist who's been studying this forever. And what they found when they did some of this advanced phonemic awareness it moved up some of the weakest kids. And some of the that had not moved with anything else before that. You with me so far? However, there is, these things can get a little complex. However, those kids who did move up, these kids did move up with advanced phonemic awareness more than they ever had before. However, their instruction was like small group or even one-to-one for like 60 hours in the course of a semester, something like that. That's very hard to duplicate in tier 1 or even tier 2 education. So where does that leave us? Here's my take on it. Okay, we don't know for sure. That research hasn't been done, number one. Suppose 2 years down the road, somebody does the research and finds out that it really is good. Then we lose these kids, the weakest kids? Of course, for 2 years, we didn't do it. What's the price to pay? What do we lose by doing this? Because this stuff, you don't do this stuff for 30 minutes. You do it for 5, at the most 10 minutes a day, and 5 is plenty. What's the price? What do we lose by doing this for 5 minutes a day for all the kids and then assess them? And then those kids who get it don't need it anymore, move them away. Because one of the big arguments against it is we're doing it with kids who don't need it. Well, you don't need to do anything with kids who don't need it. You don't need to do 20 minutes a day of fluency instruction for kids who are in the 5th grade and reading fluently at an 8th grade level. So assess the kids and do it only with those kids who are still struggling with it and are also struggling readers. If for some reason they're having trouble with advanced phonemic awareness, but they're reading everything perfectly fluently in the 2nd grade, don't worry about it. So that's my answer to that conundrum, because it is a bit of a conundrum. I think it's worth it for the 5 minutes a day for those kids who need it to do it. And finally, the coda, I think that's the right word, at the end of this argument is Linnea Erie approved of it. That's good enough for me. Linnea Erie approved of it. And she said, I reached out to her, she said, yeah, we need that research, but it's not done now. And it might not be done for years. But the principles of orthographic mapping, the principles of the relationship between letters and sounds and manipulating sounds, advanced phonemic awareness feeds into all of that. So it could help students and is worth doing. Those people who say we can't waste 5 minutes, those people have probably never been in a freaking school. I don't know what they think they're dealing with, where we're so efficient that every 5-minute interval counts. This is not General Motors. It's education, and it gets sloppy and it's not super efficient sometimes. So that's my take on that very important question. I would do it. I would start it in pre-K if you have it, and if not, in K. And I would use the same program that we mentioned earlier that is on the Reading Done, the Sounds First curriculum on Reading Done Right, which is also on the Tennessee Education website, or Hegarty, which is also a good program. I like ours better. Here's my criticism of Hegarty. They use a lot of words which you need, single syllable words which you need, but they never tell the kids. Lots of times they don't tell the kids what they need, what they mean. And I find it worrisome that kids should be working with strings of letters that they don't know what they mean. So I like our curriculum better than Hegarty for that reason. And of course, ours is free.
All right, thank you so much.
Is your Sounds First curriculum usable for kids 6th through 12th grade, or do we need to stop at a certain age?
Well, that's of course, when we're dealing with older students, those kinds of questions are such a heartache. When you're dealing with older kids who are that far behind, you have to get them to understand that the reason they're struggling has nothing to do with their intelligence. You have to. If you don't do that, then you're gonna they're not going to be with you. They're going to resist. They're going to feel like they're not going to feel great.
They probably saw that.
Oh.
I linked to it multiple times. They may not.
Okay. Have you seen, how many of you have seen this? Okay, well, this is what we recommend. This is a graphic book that explains that if you're struggling with reading, it has to do with the parts of the brain that have nothing to do with intelligence. And the reason you're struggling is because the instruction you got in kindergarten and first grade didn't work for you. Worked for other kids, but didn't work for you. But it has nothing to do with intelligence. It's a different part of the brain. You can't just tell kids they're not stupid. They've been with in the same schools with the same kids, with the same teachers, and some kids are reading and some are not. You have to show them literally at the level of the brain why they are still struggling and that those parts of the brain have nothing to do with intelligence. If you can get kids to get that, and like we did in the IROS in the course with the Did You Just Get Smarter? If you can get kids to buy into that, then you could get them to do advanced phonemic awareness. It's kind of fun. I mean, it's more fun than close reading. We ask everybody to do that. So yeah, I think you can, but only with that qualification. Good follow-up, Teresa.
Thanks, David. I think we have about 5 more minutes left in this question section. The last question, I'm going to put it in the chat. There also was another question that I can give an answer to if the person is here. When are you holding another session? Are you referring to another IROS course? Like, when is it being run again? That will be in late May or early June. So it's either going to be between mid-May and early June. It will be posted on our website when it's live. If you're talking about a Q&A session, that will be again, and it goes with the course. So it will be maybe right before the course closes or right after, or right after it closes. So I think that would address that question. And the final question, I just put it in the chat. I'm confused about the connection between standard of coherence and motivation. Can you talk about that some?
That's a really good question. Is the person who asked that here?
Yes.
Okay. I would say that the standard of coherence is a subset of the concept of motivation. Motivation is when someone has a desire or is willing to do something to achieve a goal. And that's a general concept that could have to do with getting better at foul shooting or getting better at playing the piano. Standard of coherence is more limited to just text. That students, so it's a subset of motivation applied to the area of reading texts or reading in general. If you're motivated to play the piano, then you're going to work hard to learn how to play the piano. And when you have problems, you're going to try to figure out those problems, or with practice or with a combination of practice and instruction, address those problems. If you have a high standard of coherence, well, actually, now that I think of it, there's two differences. With a high standard of coherence, you are motivated to understand the text, and you work hard to get that understanding of the text. But there is one difference. You expect to get it. A student who has a high standard of coherence has learned through experience or through instruction or through some combination that they can get a great deal out of a text, that it's worth it, and that it's worth making the effort to get a great deal out of a text. In other words, they don't just read to skim. They don't just read for a main idea. They don't just read to understand the character. They read to see that, to understand everything that the text has to offer about characters, about soybeans, about motivation, about anything. They expect to get a great deal out of a text, and they work hard to get a great deal out of it. You know, it may be similar to motivation in general, that someone who's a confident learner and is learning the piano expects to be good at it and works at it. But I don't know if that's always the case because I don't know much about pianos or music or a lot of things. But that's how standard coherence works. So in one way, it's a subset of motivation. There can be motivation to become a better baseball player, to learn how to play the piano. There's motivation to get as much as possible out of a text. But one difference is that a child who has a high standard of coherence expects to get a lot out of that text. Well, where do they get that from? Where do they learn that you can get a lot out of a text? They don't get that from leveled reading programs. They don't get that from an instruction system where they're only reading low-level text. They get that from close reading of rich, more complex text. And if that rich, more complex text is above their grade level, they get that with support, with instructional support and repetition that allows that. And that way they can see how much there is in complex text that is not in simpler, less rich text. And that's always been true, but it's especially more true in these times where we're trying to grapple with racism and with marginalized students and with texts that don't address the lives and experiences of those students. It makes it even more important that we look for everything that those texts have to offer and what they're not offering or what they're not saying just as well. So that's my answer to that very good question.
So, oh, did you have a question?
Could I share something regarding to student motivation with the text? I have recently learned with working with high school students that when I want to teach theme, because theme seems to be really tough for them to grasp, especially when they're going to do some form of analysis, I try to have them tie the theme to the heart of the character. And so now when they're reading, I want them to find evidence that proves that that's the driving force for that character. And I'm telling you that digging deeper for them motivates them to want to get the most out of that text. And I see a huge difference now when they're being assessed or they have to analyze the text because we found all of the driving forces. Like for instance, we're doing To Kill a Mockingbird. So you're finding all of the driving forces behind Atticus, you know, and Scout and so forth. And the students seem to get, you know, a lot more out of the text as opposed to just reading it and answering, you know, questions that were already created for them. They're really digging. And so I'm grateful that they're understanding it better.
That's a really important point and a really good analysis. And the only thing I would add is it doesn't have to be, you know, later grade text like high school or middle school text. You know, in Charlotte's Web, in the first chapter of Charlotte's Web, when Charlotte, and you should all know, if you don't know Charlotte's Web, you should hand in your license immediately. In Charlotte's Web, in the first chapter where she finds out that they're going to kill the kid, kill the pig, then what's the theme of that chapter? Well, what motivates Charlotte? Why is she not Charlotte, Fern? What motivates Fern? Why is she so enraged? And what's your evidence for that? And what's your evidence? And so it doesn't have to be text at the level of To Kill a Mockingbird or at the high school level. It could be third grade text and it could be kindergarten text. I don't know if I have an example which would be read aloud, but I don't have an example off the top of my head for read aloud for kindergarten. But what? Amos, yeah, but I don't know, Amos, what drives Amos, what drives Boris? You got a good example using Amos and Boris, Mrs. Liben? That's my coworker somewhere over there. Okay, that was a very good question, or a very good point.